Hi Diane, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks. And yeah, how are you, Mel?
Yeah, I'm great. I'm glad it's Friday, but it's really exciting to actually be able to sit down and have a chat with you. We met, didn't we, a couple of months ago at a networking event that you'd organised, and I thought it'd be great to hear a lot more about your work professionally and personally and about your journey. So thanks for coming today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you inviting me.
Well, it's fascinating what you're doing because we both share a passion, which is health, well-being, and you've been organising events for years, and you've got another one coming up in June, and also work with sole traders and businesses supporting them. So what would be really great to hear is about your journey and how you ended up getting involved in the wellbeing industry, because we know that it's really taken off now, but 5-10 years ago, the understanding of well-being and well-being events was relatively new. So it'd be interesting to hear how you got into that and what inspired you, and more about you as a person, really.
Okay, so you've just actually triggered something when you said well-being has sort of been around for 10 years. So I suppose through my own awareness, I realized in my teens that I was quite holistic. And I'm quite free with that as well. There's not one way. I think there's room for everything, but holistic natured interventions just sit right with me. And my business journey started at the age of 19 when I opened my first business, and it was a great success. My first career was hairdressing. I'd been involved in business and hairdressing since I was 12, and just so happened to open my own for a variety of different reasons at the age of 19. What was incredible, and I needed to move on from that business because we were bursting at the seams, and I just didn't move because all the negative stuff was going on in my head. What if I can't afford my rent? Oh my goodness, what if, all those things that the mind tells us. So it kept us burst at the seams. It was a lovely little salon, but full to the rafters. And then one night, I was actually out at a party and I got a phone call from a local fireman who said, "Di, your business is burnt down." And I thought he was joking. And
Wow.
and I was absolutely adamant that this was a wind up. And so I left the party. Luckily, I was dressed up to the nines, high heels, the lot, but I hadn't been drinking. So I was able to drive back to my town where my business was. And up until the point of passing the fire station, I was convinced that all the fire engines were going to be there and the doors were going to be down. And it wasn't. They were all up. There was not a fire engine in sight. And I thought, oh, right. I still didn't believe it until I actually drove into town and turned around the corner and there was just this blaze. And that was about 3 weeks before Christmas. And I remembered standing there in my gold dress and my high heels in the middle of the night, just looking at the building, flaking. And I thought, wow, something has taken care of my decision, that I've no choice now but to move. Whether I like it or not, I don't know what this is, but I've no choice. So, and that was the start of something completely different. So that building never came back to fruition because the damage was extensive. It was a listed building and we were basically out on our ear. It was 8 months later before I found premises and we actually reopened. I kept on all my staff through that time. It was difficult but challenging but exciting as well, because I knew that we had to move to bigger premises. So 8 months later, yes, 8 months later, we opened up in new premises. And the day that we opened, and it was pre-internet, so it was in the days where you would advertise in the local paper and loads of people would come responding to your advert and you had loads of business, and hey presto. So we had adverts going in the paper, but we'd always been a progressive salon where we were doing lots for the community and fundraising, etc. So, and obviously a major fire like that in the middle of a town centre got lots of coverage on and off TV. So there were posters and banners everywhere. And then we advertised to say we were reopening. And I advertised and said, we'll have an open day. And I wasn't sure whether anybody would come. And I couldn't believe it. They were queuing down the street. People just coming to say hello and welcome back as original clients. And
Wow.
I remember standing in the salon, and it was packed out all day. And I remember standing thinking, wow, if I've achieved this and survived this without any formal business training, what could I do with my business with professional development? And also I realized that had I had a toolkit for professional development, I would not have been frightened of moving in the first instance. But yet I saved the whole situation. I saved my business in effect. So that became another journey, and obviously bigger premises, all my staff came back, and then we eventually hired more, and it was wonderful. And I started looking for a training organisation to support us. And I found, we were in Yorkshire at the time, and I found a training company based in London that operated between London and Milton Keynes. So I just engaged all of us in this training and development programme for interpersonal skills for my team, what just gave that edge to the fantastic skills that they were being trained in and the qualified staff in the salon were all working at. So it just brought a whole host of a different level of awareness and communication to the table, and it was wonderful. And then through that process, I decided that I wanted to expand my business into holistic interventions. So we're now talking early 90s.
Wow.
So this is like nearly 30 years ago. And we had enough space. So I brought somebody into, the first thing we did was offer batch flower remedies in the hair salon. And I brought somebody in who just specialised in that, and then essential oils, and then lots of other artifacts and feng shui and all these little add-ons, while I was looking for other premises for us to expand into. That was a journey in itself, but I found premises big enough to accommodate a centre of health and well-being of all holistic types of therapies. And that was due to open late 90s, I think that was. About 97, we should have opened that. And it turned out to be nearly a 4-year project, from me deciding I wanted to put a plan together. This is what I wanted, then thinking about it, and then building out on that and bringing it to the forefront. So we found the premises. I hired 37 different types of therapists, and they delighted, because there was nothing like it. It was really way beyond its time. And I was going to call it the Centre of Wellbeing, but it just was taking so long that we were 2 weeks off the shop fitter starting, and there'd been an issue with the previous tenant in this building, and I had made an agreement with the owners that we could bring it all to fruition to avoid, they couldn't rent it unless there was a settlement on what the other previous tenant had done. And I went, I'll take care of that. I'll build it into my business plan, because there's years ahead. And it was back then, it was a 10-year business plan. I don't even think we'd get that far now, would we? Because we grow and change so much, thankfully. But I dealt in 10-year business plans back then. And it was just, everything was really difficult and edgy. And so everything got sorted. We were a couple of weeks off the shop fitters going in, I think, which would have been 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks off opening. We'd named it, we were advertising it. I'd got more hairdressing staff lined up for that division, and it was going to be a whole centre and exciting. But it just, I kept thinking, oh, it's like starting again. All these edgy things that were just blocking and getting in the way. And one day I was coming back from my accountants, I was having upfront training for these computer systems we were having installed, and I took a phone call from the landlord, and they just decided to triple my rent. And this, I don't think I've even shared this story since, but it's a great experience because it still goes on today. I meet with business people who are in difficult situations and they don't know how to navigate the way through it. And they decided to triple the rent, and they made an assumption that because I'd written off somebody else's debt, I was prepared to take it on to write it in over 10 years, that I could afford it. And I said, why are you doing this? And they said, because anybody who can pay somebody else's debt can afford it. And I went, well, I'm paying for that. And but they weren't going to back down. So, and I was driving around the biggest roundabout in Yorkshire on the days where you could sit on your telephone, on your mobile phone and drive. And I just kept going round and round and round. And then I just said, hang on a minute. So I pulled off and pulled over to the side of the road. And I just said, I don't think I'll be taking on your building if this is what you're going to do. And they said, you can't change back. We've been watching all your marketing and everything. And I said, so basically you're holding me to ransom. And they said, well, you're not going to turn back. What else are you going to do? So I just said, I'll come back to you in 48 hours. And then from there, I rang my two receptionists and I said, I'm just taking a couple of days off, cancel all my clients. I thought I just need to, there's something seriously beyond me that needs to be looked at. So I went home and I just put the kettle on, sat on my sofa. That happened for 2 days. I literally just sat on my sofa in silence. Now we would call that meditating, but I didn't realize what I was doing. I just needed to let everything settle and let the truth of looking back over these last 3.5 years of preparation of why is it so difficult? Because there was nothing getting in the way of this project that should have just flowed. And suddenly that was the last straw and it brought me to a halt. And there'd been a lot of money spent on this project, but nonetheless, you can't have anybody holding you to ransom. So I sat and sat and sat. And first of all, I started to say, what does my business need? What does my business need? Which is now what we'd call a mantra. I didn't even realize what that was. And that sort of morphed into, it just turned into a statement, what said, what does my life need? And the first time that happened, I thought, my life is business. And it is, because I absolutely love being in business. I've loved every business that I've created and really enjoy being in business and all the people that I meet. Like my life, what's my life got to do with business? Because I am business. But it stayed at that. And a few years before, I'd been to Australia and came back and considered emigration, but decided that the timing was wrong. And I thought, I'll go and retire there instead. And through this experience of me sitting on my sofa, that it was about 4 o'clock the first day, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I just got this great, I won't go into detail, I understand exactly what it was now, but then I just got this, it was like a voice that just came from the ether and it said, you need to go to Australia now. And I looked, rubbish, there's nothing further in my mind, I'm going there to retire. So I just continued and I went to bed that night, got up the next morning, just plonked myself on the sofa and again I did it. And just, what does my business need? And it's shifted straight to what does my life need? And it was early lunchtime and exactly the same experience happened again, but it was louder and it was clearer. And it just said, you need to go to Australia now. So I just stood up, put my cup of tea down and I rang Australian immigration. And that was it. I never looked back. And I thought, well, whatever I'm doing here, it's not meant to be here. I'll do it in Australia, which is exactly what happened. So it took, the whole process was about a year or so. So I just canned everything. It was really sad and disappointing for everybody involved. Yeah.
So you already raised some really fascinating aspects, actually, because number one, there wasn't the internet and it was ads in the paper. And this was a time when everything was about, somebody knew somebody, and that's how businesses operated. Mm-hmm. But there's two things that you said that you were clearly really at the forefront of what we now know about personal and professional development, which is, your first business, if you look at that in terms of tarot, that was the tower moment. In the tarot, the tower is where the whole foundation and the tower comes down or burns down to the ground. And really shocking. And at the same time, your thought processes, you said, were negative, but also you decided that all of you could benefit from this way of thinking, or this training that would support you to expand and grow. And there was something about you just knowing that, and early on just knowing that you needed to sit down and reflect on something that should have just been really smooth and gone your way. And there was something that came up in something I was listening to today, that, you know, you can forge ahead in business and keep pushing and pushing and pushing and going down a particular path. But sometimes that push is like pushing the boulder uphill, and you've got to know when to say, I think I've done my time with this, or I don't think this is the direction of travel, or I think I need to think about something else. And you weren't sure, but you gave yourself 2 days for that. So like you said, early on, you were just doing things, and now we call it mantra, now we call it personal development. So it's quite fascinating that early on you had that level of insight and was able to just make a detour.
Yes, and I think that fits with something that you said just before we started recording, when you said there's nothing really predictable about what you do and how you show up in the moment. And I think this is it. I'm not afraid to take the detour. I'm not afraid to own something. I don't get sucked into, I might be in a really way down, 6 weeks off opening a brand new business expansion. You're absolutely more or less over the line, but there's no fear with me about when major things happen, to just press a pause button and sit back and reflect, because I think these experiences that are presented to us is an opportunity for us to listen to what the truth is of what our soul needs, rather than the expectation that we have from an external point of living. So mine was about, and still is about, giving people the opportunity and the platforms to truly learn and understand and embrace and experience different ways of living their life in well-being. But also at the helm of that, when full stops come in the way, it doesn't matter how far down a road. I've got a very strong personality, and I've got a very broad remit and a very broad gift. So there's a lot in the mix, and I can reel it in really quickly as well, because I'm very boundary driven. And when I'm sensing that something is not quite right, and taking that phone call was, what do they say? The straw that broke the camel's back. Hang on a minute. That was like a major question mark that jumped out, and it was just more or less on my windscreen as I was driving round and round that roundabout. And I thought, this isn't a coincidence or a series of difficulties. There's something seriously amiss. And of course, it turned out to be energetically, I was unaligned to there.
But also, when people are putting so much work and invested, and I know from my own experiences, I've stayed in work or situations or carried on trying to run something when it's lived its, when the energy is sort of run really, and I'm meant to change direction. So one, being able to do that fearlessly, two, being able to disinvest, especially when you get so far, but be able to do a complete detour, because often our ego is really caught in this is how I work and this is how we do it. And even now, even though like psychology is much more out there for people to tap into, years ago it wasn't. And relying on your intuition, and a lot of good business people do, but to rely on your intuition after investing so much and doing that, the reason I'm emphasizing that, because I think there's still so many of us that stay stuck, chained to a concept or a situation or a way of being that has given its life course. And it's parallel a couple of situations I've had where it had to be something that almost like my angels, guides, universal consciousness knew I would not compromise on. And the one thing you were saying you won't compromise on is when somebody does that, when they tripled something. So, whether that's about your values on fairness, or, that you'll give to something and make it happen. But there's sometimes something that pushes us to a point where there just is going to be a flat no. And I know that's when the universe has stepped in, because I haven't listened to the little signs, or I haven't paid attention to my intuition or what's happening for me. And that's why I wanted to reiterate that, because I find that fascinating, especially as so long ago we didn't have access to books on the law of attraction or on how to channel your best self or authentic being. This language that sat within a closeted space within the therapeutic world but wasn't mainstream. Absolutely fascinating.
It is, isn't it? And I think the point you made about the universe, when we go enough, because of inner experiences that we're having, and whether we understand them or not, I didn't. I just switched into, I need to listen to this. And it wasn't even a decision. It was just the thing to do. And so I just took note. 1, when I got the phone call, 2, when I went home, 3, when the first voice came. It was like, I remembered looking and thinking, I've just heard that. And now I understand, with the private work that I do as a mindset therapist, I understand exactly what it was doing at that point. You know, the egoic part of my mind wanted to keep me in the status quo and keep me controlled. And that's not a negative, it's just what the mind does. But when you understand it and how you can change it. But in that realm, I actually said, oh, I've just heard that. But when it happened the second day, but identical words, but just much bigger and much louder, it was almost like I stepped out of the person I was. I literally just stood up and walked away, went into the kitchen, put my cup down. First phone call was to immigration. The second phone call was to an international removal company. And but I left that experience. I stepped out of Diane, who she was at that moment.
Wow.
And prepared, and I kept everybody safe within that, because when you employ people, you're responsible for them. So it took nearly 2 years, and you know, I kept everybody on until I sold the business. But it was the start of another remarkable journey. And even although I went with it, I wasn't fully aware of what happened. I just stayed with it, and something just elevated me. And there was this tremendous, beautiful acceptance that it was like I just stepped on another road, and this was the thing to do, without looking back, without looking sideways, but also managing everybody who was in my life and my community and my environment at that time. And I did the move really private, because I was in a really tight-knit community, beautiful people, but they didn't acquire the acceptance when somebody left the community. So I felt compelled to protect myself from that, and also to protect them from fallout of thinking I was moving away from my family as well as my community. Wow. So there was a lot of dimensions in it that I was quite easily balancing. But for sacred sake of everybody around, there was nothing to boast about. There's nothing boastful about going to live in a new community, because there's a lot of losses that come with that. Even when you're moving overseas, yes, it's a new beginning, but you're leaving so much of your heritage and your history behind. And there's nowhere on this planet that's utopia. I've lived in the most stunning places, and where I am now, I'm absolutely in love with the environment that I live in again. I just think I'm so fortunate. But that's the planet. That's not us. It's the planet. So it's not about going to a shiny, brand new, hot country. It's the psychological ramifications and pluses and gains that come with that, and just having consideration for everyone around you. And also, I did have the foresight. I was only I was probably about 31 when I decided to move, but I did have the foresight to realise the impact that it would have, because I've done a lot for the community as well, and we were a prominent business within the community, and we did a lot of fundraising. We were connected to the hospitals, and it was a delight. But I realised that there was an ending going to be for everybody, but it had to happen, because I obviously had a calling to take control and start to move my life, not my business life. It became about my life. And I actually rang my coach in London, and I went, I'm emigrating, and he just laughed. He went, where? And the plan was that. And I went, it wasn't, just had this voice. And he honestly thought I'd lost it. But I now know, and he's still doing the same business. He's expanded his business. He's down here in Chiswick. And I know that he understands the language fully now. He did then, he trained me in NLP, but now it's an open language, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, psychology, it's not woo-woo anymore. We've got science backed up, haven't we?
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know? But there was, like you said, you related it to tarot, you know, when we go enough and we draw that line, it's almost like we're handing over and we're not negating, we're not relinquishing anything, but we're just opening to something that we don't always know what it's going to be, because there are no limits when you let go of the ego and you let go of any expectation of life. There are no limits, but then it's a healthy thing to do to put some safe boundaries in that. And it's almost like you're dancing with invisible boundaries and you're dancing with invisible limits, because you know that it's right. And of course, now, today, as a mindset therapist, I understand exactly what happened. I was completely responding to the needs of my soul, and it was speaking to me, and I was listening to it. And then there was another intervention that came in that I just happened to be fortunate about, and to be able to hear and take on board and instantly respond to. And when you're operating at that level, at absolute soul level, it brings 99.8% truth. And I think this is where it allows us to just go through the whole of that, as an example, my experience, without any fear and without second guessing. There is no second guessing when you're shopping in a shop that only serves 99.8% truth to you. Because there's nothing getting in the way. It's like you're moving through on an elevated cloud in a way, but very, very grounded, because there's something intrinsic about the grounding and the certainty that comes from letting go. Does that make sense?
It does. I think it's quite a tricky concept to explain sometimes. It's almost like one of those journeys I think you have to make yourself, in your own soul journey of, you know, facing your own ego and your own sense of where you're going, and grasping onto who you think you are as a woman, as a man, as a consultant, as a healer, whatever that identity is. And then being able to, like what you say, you didn't know what you were doing, but you were running those processes of tuning into yourself to hear what you needed. And very difficult, because equally, you know, we're just from a different side of the Pennines, aren't we? We're both northern women, and equally, when I was growing up, if you did something that meant moving away, that was your culture and your identity. And it's sometimes it has its blessing and its curse. It's sometimes very difficult to remain in a system if you are growing, because sometimes you grow beyond what you're able to grow within that setting, and being able to tune in and follow your own path, especially as a woman back in the 80s and 90s, and a career woman. You know, the world has changed a lot, but it certainly was similar in terms of how you're talking. So yeah, I think quite a difficult concept for people to grasp, but when they're on their own journey and they're able to start trying to filter through, are they being honest and truthful with themselves? Is there, you know, equally, I've worked in mental health, so, you know, is there some reason for their distress? And, you know, is there a reason why they're getting depressed? Is it because they are ignoring the innate sound that their soul is calling out for? Absolutely. And that is something that is very rarely talked about in mental health, in therapy, or anything like that. But I certainly know from my own journey, when I've got depressed or anxious, it's because I've either been overworking at something I shouldn't be doing, or suppressing some of the real the things, the values, or the things that I wanted to pursue when I look back at those times. But we didn't have access to that information. But before I explore then your fascinating part two if it's part two journey in Australia. I'm just interested to know that how did you, in the 80s, when everything that around well-being was seen as woo-woo, and because I certainly know if you look at the history of how the government and science has sort of looked at those things in a different eye, because they said that they didn't have the science to back it up, even though we've used a lot of those approaches for thousands of years. But what was it that you knew, or had you come across some form of healing or technique or something that had worked with you, and you want, you know, what was it that brought that holisticness into your business when it was very rare back then?
Okay, so my experience in realizing that I couldn't get up on a morning and eat a bowl of cornflakes without my cells responding hit home to me when I was about 4 years old. So I knew my system was responding. My brothers, and I'm the youngest of 6, my brothers and sisters, we were all served Weetabix or cornflakes, and I literally went bang. It was like, I'm on the sofa and my mum's going, wake up, you need to go to school. And I'm like this, and everybody else was bouncing around me. And I realized that there was only me affected by food. And I didn't voice that. But the awareness was there, but I wasn't you just didn't voice, did you? You just didn't voice back then. I was born in 65, you know, I'm talking about probably not even 1970. You just didn't voice. I was feeling that I realized food affected me. You know, chocolate made me moody, it made me skin itch. All these things were happening, and I didn't say anything because we had a lot of 6 children back then. You needed order in the family, and it was really strict boundaries, and there was no room for complaining or saying things because they thought you were odd. And so I was trained not to speak a lot, but being the youngest and having the personality that I did, I kept trying to sort of break the seal on that. But I realized there was something with certain foods, and then I realized white bread again just completely shut me down, but nothing consciously. It was all happening unconsciously, and I was feeling it in my skin and inside. I could tell my brain changed when I ate certain foods. And I sort of maneuvered through with that because you just don't know any other difference. And I found myself, I walked into a shop one day in Leeds, and it was fabulous shop. It doesn't exist anymore, which is really, really sad, because every time I'm in Leeds, people still talk about this store and the fragrance of it. I walked in and it was like the whole world just opened up. And I felt as though the atmosphere in this store had just seeped into my soul. But it was the fragrance that got me. So I found out what this was and I bought it. And it was an essential oil. And that became the start of another subliminal journey. You could call it coincidences, that everything that's brought me to what it is today. But we do know as well, there are no such thing as a coincidence. It's serendipity, isn't it? And it's a higher force that's guiding us, and whether it's connecting the magical nature of universal law or our own soul, what all these facets we've got as a human being that is just upholding who we are, and it's given us an opportunity to nurture ourselves and come home to ourselves and introduce things into our life that on a sensory capacity light us up. And my experience of walking into this store lit me up, and I thought, I've got to have this. So I became addicted to this essential oil. And then I found another store, and one day I'm queuing to buy some lovely handmade cards, and I looked to the side and there's all these little bottles, and I thought, oh, they look familiar, and they were essential oils. So I started asking questions and bought a few, and that was my journey into essential oils. And then I bought an encyclopedia of essential oils, because there were certain fragrances that I liked sometimes, and sometimes there were things that I didn't. So a lot of my knowledge around holistic interventions is what I've discovered myself, but not needed to go into it as a business. But I fully endorse it because it works. And the beauty about holistic natured intervention is if it's not going to work for you, it won't do any harm to the human system. So if I was burning something as basic as an essential oil, right, and I'm thinking today, well, actually that smelled nice yesterday, but it doesn't today. That's because my my cells have shifted over. So they just don't need it today. But the fact that we're burning it, it's not going to do any harm. Whereas if you're taking a prescription, and this isn't a criticism, but if you're taking a prescription and it's not doing you any good, it's, you know, it's not going to just not doing harm. It's not going to sit neutral, is it? Something's going to happen. So I just found I gravitated and it suited my inner world. My skin wasn't irritated with nice things and what I call clean products. But the catalyst came. This was the reason why the first holistic therapeutic product I brought into my salon was based on an experience. We were doing a hair show, and a lady who still presents on TV today was the presenter for this hairdressing show. There were about 800 people in the audience, and it was I think it wasn't the first show we'd done, but it was the biggest show that my salon had done. Excuse me. And I was unfazed by it. It doesn't matter to me whether I'm speaking to 1 or 2 people or 800 people, it's the same thing. But when the presenter came into the changing room and we were all in there with the models, it was buzzing, it was fantastic. And all my staff were in there doing all the thing. And the presenter came in and I knew her. I've met her a few times before. She went, right, Di, these are the 3 questions that I'm going to ask you on stage. And all of a sudden, everything, I just went deaf. I could not hear a word she was saying. And I'm thinking, and it was like she was in front of me talking to me with no sound. And my main senior stylist saw this interaction of what were going on. And of course, she'd never seen me like that before, because it had never happened before. And she just put a hand on my shoulder and I just looked at her and I could see her mouth moving, but I couldn't hear. I just went there. And it was fear. And that was the first time ever in my life I'd experienced true fear. And I've never looked majorly into it, but that was the start of my soul rising, saying, you're doing all this externally, there's an expectation, but what about you? And I was ignoring that. But my gorgeous stylist, after this woman had said these are the questions, I went, I can't hear you, you're going to have to shout. What do you mean shout? I have a microphone. I went, and I just kept saying, I can't hear you. And Helen, she said, come with me. So she sat me in the toilet and she got out these little bottles out of a bag and she went, you need these? And I went, what are you doing with all this? She went, Di, they're great. She went, I get emotional unrest. I said, I know you do. She went, these keep me balanced. And it was batch flowers. And she had a rescue remedy and she had 6 drops on your tongue. So I did, and my hearing came back. And I thought, wow. So we got on with the show. We had a fantastic show. And I said to her, we need to chat about this. And so we did. And then I went down the road of exploring what these birch flowers were and thought it was incredible and started using them for myself. And then, of course, I met somebody who was totally focused in that field, and it was a client of the salon. And obviously, I must have been talking about it, or she was talking about it, and it opened up. And eventually, I said to her, "Look, this is the project. We're looking to open a centre of wellbeing, and but it's going to be a while. Why don't we open this up to our clients here?" And that's the reason why. And how and what the first holistic intervention was that I brought into a hairdressing salon, and our clients absolutely loved it. It was incredible. So we'd got all these things. That was the first, but that was based on a personal experience, which was fear-based. And I don't know why, because I've never had that before, or since rather, even in any public speaking event.
Wow. Gosh, that's fascinating. And it's, like you say, it's funny how you can get introduced to things in a moment and realize the potency, but that's a really big reaction. But I was also fascinating to hear you talk about, you know, as a child sitting there eating cornflakes and Weetabix, which, you know, was the standard gruel for us growing up, wasn't it? You know, that's what you had in your cupboards, and the white bread, and how you felt your cells reacting, because actually the research is showing now that our thoughts will influence the way that our cells vibrate and oscillate, and different things that we put into our system. But often it's only when people do get very clean that they start to be able to tune in and feel the reaction to different food. Does it make me sleepy? Does it make me heavy? And now we understand that the food industry, especially the way it's been doctored so much over the years, is not great for a lot of people's bodies. But back then again, you know, we had to go. My mum had a special diet when I was growing up, because just the way she had a bad stomach. And we used to go to the health food shop just to get brown bread. And I was thinking about this the other day, that now you've got an aisle with about 50 different types of brown bread. And back then, brown bread was one loaf in a health food shop, and it was special and it was expensive. And we just didn't eat that stuff growing up. So fascinating that you, again, clearly, you know, you must have been meant to discover these. And again, the batch flour remedies were quite unusual. I've taken those, and I know that the rescue remedy is great for like stress and anxiety, and like you say, you can do some public speaking. So that was the beginning of the journey for you, opening up, which sounds like you was fairly open and receptive anyway, but opening up even more to bringing what was to become your life path, really, of the holistic alternative world on board. So was there anything else you came across at that phase, or did it open up much more when you went? Yeah.
No, there was a lot of outside work. It was just you know, I partied like everybody else and enjoyed most things, going out, having a drink and socializing and everything. But my outside work at home, it was massage, reflexology. My first experience with reflexology was truly incredible. And again, I was like thinking, oh my God, I need to tell the world about this. And I think that was something that just sort of, this is so good. I need to tell people about this so they can experience it. My first massage, I mean, I just cried. It was just a beautiful release. And I was so fortunate that the girl who was massaging me was an ex-nurse, and she was moving into Holisitc. So she understood the whole of the skeletal system. And I think there's something in that. You know, we're so blessed to have people in the holistic world who have come from or transitioned or working in both
from a professional role.
And I mean, what brilliant trainings they have to become nurses, to become doctors, to become paramedics and specialists, you know, and they choose to bring another dimension into their life and bring it into giving us those opportunities. She knew every part of my body and how to manage that. And I was really appreciative of that. And again, I've never done hospitals or prescriptions and things, but I just knew this girl knew my body more than I did. And then I discovered another masseuse who came from a completely different angle, spiritual angle. So that came into my life at the age of 22, just after I'd lost my mother. She died when I was 22. And I realized that I could just let go of the pain when I was on that bed having a massage. And between the two of them, and one, I traveled 20 miles to go and have a massage with her. But so I had 2 massages a month, and one with one girl, one with another. And that continued until I left England at the age of 35. And they kept me going, and also it kept me injury free. So not only was it helping me dull the pain, because I was raised in a family unit where when my mother died, I sort of was there to support others, and the family dynamic completely changed. And my concern again was about helping others. So, and my grief went on a back burner, so it went in. And having massage just numbed. It was like a drug. It just numbed that pain. So that was my relief, and it kept me going. So twice a month for 13 years nearly. And then I luckily I engaged in that when I got to the other side of the world, and it kept it going. And until my system had enough. So I've had quite a few losses through my life, and like we do, and back then, I mean, fortunately, we have people who, I've got some amazing grief and loss specialists in my circle now who we signpost other people to. But I didn't realise how grief and loss are not grieving well. And in the circumstances of losing my mother, I hadn't grieved it at all. It just went in because it was told to, you can stop that, we need to get on with things. And nobody were doing anything wrong. They were just all doing what we call learned behaviour, what they'd been taught, that stiff upper lip and get on with it, and, you know, absolutely dying inside.
Don't talk about it, just get on, and it's a silent sort of world then, isn't it? But
it's tragic.
And it is tragic, and I think to some degree we still you know, different cultures deal with grief in different ways, but also, you know, you were getting what we now know in research is your nervous system was getting soothed, and we know that touch produces oxytocin in the system, and it's the oxytocin gives you feelings of love, which creates a pain. And actually that's the same effect that to some degree that heroin addicts are looking for, you know, that when you have a shot of a drug, what does it do? It numbs out the pain. And it's a way of holistically shifting that pain and that trauma out of the system, because part of it is the process and part of it is about getting that self-care and that other care. So it's like what you're saying, it's all of those different routes to get what you need at the time. And then that's what your soul knew it needed at the time and continued to need while you move through that. Because it's, you know, losing a parent, no matter what the relationship is like with our family, it's still can be a huge devastating loss that throws us for months, if not years.
I had a phenomenal relationship with my mother. She was absolutely beautiful, and I just didn't have enough time with her on this planet. And even although we were prepared for her death, we weren't prepared. You can never be prepared. We were told, we knew about it, we were nursing her until it came, we had to hand her over to professionals in a hospice, that threw another dynamic on it altogether, you know, because I'm the one who took charge, and I was trained. I was the youngest, but I was trained to look after the family. That was my role, and I was given that role really early on. So when my mum's life was counting down, and it came to the point of her needing to be moved to a hospice, I was the one over the consultant table going, excuse me, she's my mother. We're not passing her over to anybody. Where I'm going to do it. If nobody else wants to do it, I'm doing it. But that was complete and utter ignorance. I've not even stepped foot in a hospice. I've not even stepped foot in a hospice. I'd raised funds for them, raised money for them, but not actually stepped foot in one. And but the ownership, and of course it was all about attachment and separation as well, and the trust, and these deals we make, these transactions we make really early on in life, undertaking our parents' expectations and running with it. And really, what are we doing? We're looking for approval. We're being trained into a system to function for what they knew and what they did. But me as a human being, you know, fortunately, I eventually outgrew that once my life and my health caught up with me and just brought me to a grinding halt again. That was another change in circumstance. And at that point, that's when I was brought to a halt, and somebody identified that I'd not grieved my mother's death. But through those 18 years of not grieving her, that grief was still inside me. And we know now, you know, I knew that I'm trained in grief and loss now, but it had taken on a life of its own, and it was allowing me to make decisions that I wouldn't normally make, cognitively, physically, all sorts of, you do things in
interesting
life.
Yeah
Because if grief is left unattended and there's no date, there's no deadline, because everybody grieves differently, and some people, and being in the Western world, we're conditioned not to grieve. You know, it's like you go to a funeral, you may cry, and then you have to start going out and going back to work and like, let's get on with it. What the hell's that about? It takes at least 1 to 2 years but to start finding some sort of resolve, you know. However, if it's buried and nothing's getting dealt with and you're trying to navigate your world around, you start numbing, which is what addicts do. You numb out for the pain. And I was getting released through holistic therapies. I mean, I was burning a certain 2 or 3 essential oils for about 2 or 3 years before having a conversation with a client. And she went, oh, she'd actually lost a child. And she said what was helping her was these essential oils. I said, oh, I use essential oils. She went, yeah, and I burn this one, and it helps alleviate my depression.
Wow.
And I thought, am I depressed? Of course I was depressed. My mother had died and I was told not to cry. And so it went in. But naturally, through discovering in this shop a few years before that took me into this other world, and my salon had burnt down, so the new salon we were in by then, right across the road was what I called heaven, this magical haven of beautiful handmade candles, beautiful essential oils, absolutely everything. It was like walking into a little holistic haven. It was an art shop, but they had all these other little artifacts. So I spent thousands in there over the years with them, and it was well worth it. But then I've got a client going, oh, well, I burn these 2 oils and it helps alleviate my depression. I was like, those are the oils that I burn. So my soul was, it was ahead of me because I wasn't aware. But it just goes to show that we don't need to be aware. We just need to give ourselves permission to do things. And what do we have the saying? What makes you feel good? Do it. You know, and people still today, this is why part of the work I do with my clients, you know, they know what makes them feel good, but they don't want to do it, or they daren't do it because of what other people will say. It's like, this life is to be lived once, and nobody wants to get to the end of it and think, I wish I'd have just done that, you know. And I think it's about being compassionate enough to yourself to give yourself permission to do things that is sensory and right and appropriate for you in a really kind way. It's, you know, self-care it can be a nice big fat piece of carrot cake. It can be the biggest piece of chocolate cake. You know, it can be burning an essential oil, sitting. I mean, my friends used to laugh and go, it's like walking into a church, coming into your house. I didn't have lights on, I just had candles. And which led me into creating a candle company at one point. But just, it soothed, the candle light soothed. I'd have to go home from work. I was really happy to work 12-hour days in my salon. But as soon as I got home, the Tibetan bells were the music. I had the music on. I found this CD one day and it said Reiki on it. And I thought, what's that? Nice little Japanese flower. Oh, I'll buy that. And I still play that today. And the music was on and essential oils going. And obviously it was soothing. It was keeping me going. Going.
And sometimes all of those elements, all of those different dimensions can keep you going. But there comes a point sometimes, like you say, and through no fault of your own and no fault of anybody else, that was the culture to repress and ignore something that was devastating. And sometimes there comes a time where you have to, like you say, you have to feel that. And my dad died when I was 18, but I didn't have a close relationship with my dad because I didn't grow up with him in the same house. But it was only when I went and worked at Samaritans after having my second son. So I was about 27 at this stage, and they did a 6-week grief and loss course. And that was it. It just opened up the floodgate. But also, interestingly, it made me at the time, because often I've experienced something and then I'll find books that give me the theory to understand what's going on. And that's why I've been trained in so many different things, because I like to have different perspectives of some of the difficulties that we experience. But I found books about how you can grieve people that weren't in your life, how you grieve the loss of the father that he could have been over the loss of the person that you didn't know. Or when I saw friends who had a dad and they had that relationship. So it was 6 weeks of tapping into a whole range of feelings I'd never felt, and they were very powerful. And that's one of the things that I've helped people understand over the years when they go into crises, is people get scared when they hit these very powerful feelings. But I say to them often, and it's not in every case, but often it's very powerful and overwhelming because you've pushed it down for so long. Once you breathe into it and accept that that's what you're experiencing, and it's perfectly okay and acceptable, that then it takes the potency out of it. But your nervous system has just had to hold on to that so much. So all of those things you were doing were helping you to remain functioning and helping the process flow. But there comes a time, like what you say, it's like you have to sit with that and recognize the very painful elements. And they are, aren't they? Often we don't want to feel that pain, but
Yeah,
behind the pain is something else.
oh yeah. And you see, understanding emotions is not, we do it now, it's in the forefront, and
Yeah.
fortunately we've got the most amazing experts who help people with that. They help children with it. They help 90-year-olds understand their emotions and the meaning of each emotion, because we just weren't trained in this stuff, and it was so limiting. And I mean, emotions are the most powerful thing that we can have in our system other than our soul. And yet nobody were putting names to it, and unless you were either in love or you were angry or you were cheesed off,
Yeah.
or you felt nice. This tiny little nucleus of emotions that we brought out to play because that was the language that we were taught, and those were the only emotions we were taught to use. And then, of course, don't get angry, and who do you think you are? So even when you did get frustrated and angry, because there was a whole package of emotions that weren't being used. So that creates frustration, and depending on the circumstances, that frustration can fall out into anger. But then you don't know what you don't know, and you've got a whole jigsaw of emotions that you're probably using 4 out of 100. And you're going to get frustrated with that, but it's breaking through that seal, isn't it? And I think giving yourself permission to do something slightly different without, because nobody wants to upset the apple cart. And of course, it's easy to get branded by a family. She's the black sheep. She's different. She's this, she's that, I wasn't black sheep. And now I'm really, really proud of it. But back then, I used to fight my way for survival to rid myself of that title, but I don't care. And that wasn't from my mother, that was from the rivalry, which is healthy, because the language we were all raised with. Whereas now I think, oh my goodness, I am so glad I was the black sheep, and because we now know that that's something far greater than the conditioning that we're born and raised in, isn't it? To solve other people's life problems and to fix theirs rather than looking to ourselves and understanding. So everything comes back to understanding the person, but I think it's when we have the intelligence and the right people around us to take us on those journeys. So like the massage, the batch flowers, the candlelight, the music, all the rest of it. It was a survival kit. That was, when I look back, I was high functioning, but I was surviving this. And the times I came out of that and into the consciousness of the searing pain that came with that grief was getting in the way, and it kept me isolated. It did keep me isolated in my own life. But when it's happening so slowly and you start numbing to things, you don't actually realize the separation that you're creating for your own life. And so I didn't go out for a year after she died. I just went home and put all these things on just to soothe my soul, And it was when I emigrated. I thought I was going to emigrate. I thought, right, now I've done all this work. I was been in business since I was 19. I'm going to live in the sun. I'm going to live on the beach, and I'm not going to work full time anymore. I'm going to change my life. So this is what was happening in here. So I was given this gift of this voice to say, forget everything here, you need to go to Australia now. And then in that process I did, but then I started thinking, oh, I'm conjuring up all these things in the mind, not from my soul. I'm going to work part-time, I'm going to go on the beach, and well, of course I did. Everything is the land over there. It's an incredible climate in Western Australia to be able to enjoy the land. So that was my life. But I'd got business running through my veins, and it wasn't long before I was establishing another business, and the business was candle making. I didn't do it. I'm a full creative, but I'm also a logic as well, but I don't make candles, and never have done. But I realized when I was over there, I was so fortunate. All my friends I met really early on when I arrived, and they're still fantastic close friends today. We all still communicate and everything. And and you socialize different over there. So you go to the houses, and I'm thinking, I've just got any candles. And I thought, oh, if I'm going to be friends with them. And we just all knew different groups of people. We just knew the friendships were there. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to the houses and mine, because there were no shops selling clean, beautiful candles. So although in England, prior to emigration, I had candles, I always chose soy and cotton wicks and pure essential oils, no fragrant oils, that's no good, but nothing with petroleum in or anything, just pure, so it was all this sensory world. And when I went to Australia, to cut a long story short, I actually created a candle company, because this little store right opposite my second salon in England sold all these amazing handmade candles, and one of the nicest candles I'd ever had happened to be a candle maker in Australia that I just kept buying. But when I went to live in Australia, so again, it's serendipity. So when I went and nobody's burning candles anywhere, and I'm thinking they've got all these gorgeous outdoor settings on a night and not one candle. No, when I'm not having this. So I started looking up the candle makers, and then I thought, oh, I'll put a collection together. I'll bring my experience of Holisitc. So I created a candle company, and that I thought I would just have to give as gifts, buy them and give them as gifts. And also, if my friends wanted to buy them, they could. And then one girl, the day everything came together, and I'd got it all on this long table in the lounge, a colleague came to see me, and she went, oh, and when she saw it, she said, what are you doing? I said, nobody burns candles here, and I don't know why. Little did I know we were it wasn't tropical climate, but 90, 100 degrees. There was a complete fire ban, and I didn't realize that it was just people didn't burn candles because of that, and didn't even think about it, because I always burn candles responsibly. So this girl said, I want to sell it. I went, like what? She went, party plan. I went, what's that? I'd never even been to a party plan thing, so I didn't know what she was talking about. And I said to her, oh, look, the purpose of this is to heal people's lives through light, through colour, because I've been trained in colour therapy. And and I said, and through colour and essential oils. And I said, so do you know anything about it? She went, no. I said, well, if you did do this, you would have to do it. I'd have to train you and do exactly what I tell you, because it changes people's lives, and you can't mess with it, because it's so important that people get the right thing. So I think I started with about 6 or 8 candle makers who put a collection together for me, and then I put a brochure together. So this girl said, oh, I'll do it. I went, oh, okay then. So I put this brochure together, and then of course that quickly escalated into having a glossy brochure produced. And once she got her pack, I put her a pack together, trained her, and she went out, and bang. Because I created a win-win situation, wasn't about the money, it was about the healing, and it equally worked for her as what it did for me. Over a year, I lived in a big house, but it was bursting at the seams, and the neighbours thought we were on drugs, because all they could smell was essential oils, and I had everything delivered to the house, but it took over. So I had to move out hire this place to take the business out and put it in this division where we had all the candles coming in through weekly orders. But after about a year, I thought, oh, oh, this is not a hobby business. What do I want to do with it? So I thought, right, okay. So I put a plan in place, put a 5-year plan in place at that point. And I was 3.5 years into that 5-year plan. And we had, I think, about 38 advisors, 7 stores. Because
Wow.
it's so different, everybody loved it. And it was just like a magnet to everybody. And of course, everybody loved it because there was no chemicals involved. We were having and it also regenerated all the candle making industry in Western Australia because nobody were buying candles. So we've got all these artisan candle makers and the businesses weren't doing anything. So, but we resurrected all the candle industry as well. And I had some beautiful candle makers, lots of advisors, and 7 stores here and there. And one day I was sat at my desk and all of a sudden, and I loved it. It was the most beautiful company and everybody in it. It was just a delight again. And I was just sat at my desk and all of a sudden this voice came up and it went, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, what is this? Because I love what I'm doing and everybody loved it. I'd got the most gorgeous people around me. It was, even the strap line, I've adopted it into this festival in part, and because it's true. And I thought, what? And I thought, pushed it to one side. A few days later, up it came again. "What are you doing here?" But it was it was almost like my conscience had stepped out of my body and it was talking to me going, "And what are you still doing here?" I was only 3.5 years. And I realized, I thought, oh, there's something not right here. But what it did was it made me go within. And as soon as the first time I sort of thought, what is happening? And my attention turned to me, I realized my body wasn't feeling how it should. And that screamed loud at me because I'm vibrant, I've got high energy, I'm comfortable in my own skin, I operate autonomously, I can achieve a lot in a lot of hours in a day and still socialize and do other things. But I realized, well, hang on a minute, I just don't feel right. And so over a period of 6 months, I was having blood tests and nothing was showing until the last lot of blood tests. The doctor said, "Hey, you're going to be really happy. There's nothing again, Diane. Nothing's showing up. So you can go home and get on with your life because there's nothing wrong with you." And I just sat there and I went, well, I can go home and get on with my life, but that's not true. I said, because I don't feel right. And it was 6 months into having blood tests. She finally said to me, "How do you feel?" And I just said to her, "I feel as though I'm dying." And she went, "What?" I said, "I feel as though I'm dying." "Don't be ridiculous." I said, "You just asked me." So I've thought about it and I'm saying, I feel as though I'm dying. My light is dulled. I feel as though I've got a tiny flicker instead of this light inside. And she handed me my file and she went, "Give that to reception on your way out. I can assure you you're not dying. So go home and get on with your life." I went, "Okay." So I walked out, got in my car and I thought, I wonder what this is. I wonder what it is. And then 2 weeks later, I woke up. I made another appointment for the doctors because I was just, not working. And so I was waiting for this appointment to happen. And then one morning I woke up and I was brushing my teeth. And when you just focus in the mirror, we do a lot of things on automatic pilot, don't we? I know where my teeth are. So I know when I'm brushing, I don't need to be looking in a mirror. But I just happened to be over the sink and I'm brushing my teeth. And all of a sudden, my attention went straight back to this mass that had appeared overnight on my neck. And instinctively, I knew it was serious. And I thought, this is whatever has been going on. It's been trying to get my attention. And of course, now I understand when emotional trauma that's living inside the body cannot be articulated and get out, it will turn into a physical response. And that's exactly what happened to me.
Wow.
And so not to go into major detail, but over the following fortnight, I think once I saw this mass, then I think I'd made an appointment at the doctor's based on that. I had a couple of weeks to wait. And then other things, physical, my body just started shutting down. And then I ended up having a visit based on my doctor's recommendation, just drive to the hospital. So I thought, oh, they're going to do some tests. And as I was driving there, I rang my husband up because it was the Friday before Christmas. And I went, I'm just going to hospital because all this, more and more of this shutting down has happened. He went, do you want me to come? I went, no. So all the party people will be there from Christmas. I said, I'll be home in an hour. And of course I wasn't. They were incredible. They brought people back who had left for the evening or for the weekend or whatever to do all these scans. They just did everything. And they were obviously on a fact-finding mission because it was big and it was, you know, prominent, but there was physical stoppages happening throughout my body. And so they just were incredible. And they tested everything, and it got to about 9-10 o'clock at night, and they all said, right, we're going to have a meeting. So they called me in and all got me out of my little room, and they said, right, we've been able to eliminate everything but this mass on the side of your neck. And as soon as I said the word mass, I went, he's saying it's cancer, because that was my experience of my mother died of cancer, and a mass was, you know. And they said, no, we're not. But this is a Friday night, and they said, but we'll have all your results and everything together for your doctor's appointment on Wednesday. They were incredible. They saved about 3 months of being in assistant testing. And they said, so if you can come back and collect everything on Wednesday before you go, then your doctor will give you the results. So I did. And they said, and don't go on your own. And as soon as I said that, I thought, they know. So I took my husband. And it was during that doctor's appointment, she opened the letter, and then she just looked at me, and she looked at my husband. She said, what are you doing on Christmas Day? And I went, was spending it with friends. And she went, is that what you want to do? I went, yeah. She went, is it? I said, what are you getting at? And she went, well, if it's not what you want to do, or you're doing anything for the sake of it, my advice is do what you want and do what's right for you. And I just laughed, and I looked at my husband. He was just sort of sat in a loss. And I said to her, what are you trying to tell me? And she just said, this is going to be the last Christmas that you ever see. And this is the 18th of December, right? And I went, what are you talking about? And she said, you've got, Di, about 12 weeks to live. And that turned out to be the best gift I could have had in my life, because that opened up to a whole different ball game altogether. And at that moment that she gave me that prognosis, something happened inside my body. And the best way to describe it is now complete alignment of my soul, my emotions, and my head. So yeah, it was incredible. But I instinctively, so from here down, and I remembered looking down, it was like an explosion, but a silent one. It was like looking down at this pool of absolute calm and tranquility and absolute beauty. Everything, like every cell in my body it just came into alignment. But what came of that was in this explosion, what was like a silent thud, came this knowing. And I just went, no, I'm not going to die. I'm not having this. I don't care what. And I was looking at the scientific evidence. She'd got some of the slides up. But I'm just not having it. I'm just not having it. It's as simple as that. I know I'm going to live. But from here upwards, my head, my thinking brain, it was like dusty bin. It just exploded. And I got this vision in front of me of little bits of unfinished business. And I could see all the people who had died in my life, and the grief in there, and little arguments that you'd have and not perhaps finish off and resolve. And there was a lot of lovely stuff, but I just saw 41 years on like this invisible TV screen. And I thought, well, I'm not going to die. And I said, she said, what do you think? I said, what do I think? I think you've got something wrong, because I'm not going to die. I said, but something's just happened. I said, just hear me out. I said, I don't know what's happened. I said, but I've just got this feeling and this knowing I ain't gonna die. And I said, so, and I've just felt it. I said, but I don't understand it. So, but please take it on board, because I don't want you to put me down a road that you're going to write me off. And she just said to my husband, does she always react like this? And he just went, because of course you don't react like that unless you know, something valid's happening. And so I said, so what causes this then? She says, you're in denial. You've got, it's usual. People given difficult information like this, the first thing they do, it's normal to go into denial. I went, hang on a minute, I'm not in denial. I'd become present. I'd become absolutely present in that moment. I said, I'm not in denial. But she just kept impressing that I was in denial. So then I said to her, so what causes this thing? And it was a rare form of cancer. I was in the 2% that they didn't know about. So of course they didn't really know, but they put a label on it because they wanted some traction around it, and you know, they needed to help me, which was phenomenal. But at the end of the day, it was a 2% thing. They didn't. I mean, that moment I discovered they understood 80% of cancers and how to deal with them. I'm like, oh, how fortunate and blessed are we on the planet to have such magnificent scientific knowledge around us and the ability for them to support people. And they don't know about the 2%. So that is, to me, it's like a piece of a jigsaw that we don't know what to do there. But it don't mean to see it and just go in and meddle and do anything. But she thought I was in denial, and I wasn't. I just had this knowing and that I wasn't going to die. And I remained resolute. And of course, I was put straight in the system. And it was Christmas. And over there, all the surgeons go away for holiday. They close down. They've got the priorities right. They close down and have holidays at Christmas. So they booked me in for early January. And when I met with my oncology team, I just found myself saying to them, do not, please, I said, I've got to tell you what's happened, and it's not left me. I've had this experience, and I said, I need to sort my head out. I'm thinking, I said, but I just know I feel really, really calm. And I said, so please treat me as though I just know I'm not going to die. Regardless of all this evidence we're looking at, I believe it. You know, I'm wearing it. I felt as though I'm dying, but I now know I'm not going to die. And what was happening was it was the death. It was the death of the old Diane again, and the new beginning of something new. And in this explosion of all this, what I call unfinished business, I could also see a blank canvas. And I knew my life as I knew it was over. I was sat and everything fell away apart from my name. And I thought, wow, there's a possibility. I wasn't expecting this. Wasn't expecting this. But clearly there's another life ahead for me that I don't know about. But I just trusted that this was serving me to let go and pass this company that I'd created. It was incredible. Onto somebody else. And I was meant to have something else in my life, another experience. So it's
like the many versions of Diane, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that, because occasionally I say to my clients now, when we're reframing and I'm supporting them to let go of the old ways of being, and it's okay to remodel yourself. You can do it consciously, and if you ignore it, you'll get pushed into it, because this is what happened to. I outgrew myself, and my soul or universe, whatever you want to call it, said, stop messing around. We've got something else for you to do. So it took me out of my control and brought me to a higher place. And then it's happened again and again. And so, you know, sometimes I said to my clients, we grow out of our lives before we even realize it. And we can be looking for things and just slowly integrating things into our lives. But, you know, not consciously realize, actually, I just need to remodel. And I always say to them, have you heard of somebody called Madonna? She's quite famous. She sings and she dances on stage. I go, she's invented herself 8 times, reinvented herself 8 times. And lots of people do. And it's okay, isn't it, to reinvent yourself? So. And
well, I didn't have Madonna in my head. I had Bowie.
Yeah, exactly.
It's quite extreme, but also not necessarily the type of news that you want to get to reinvent yourself. But the fact that you had that utter knowing and that sense about you, that's what was happening, is fascinating, you know, that it was about moving on to a new chapter of your life.
It was, and it, make no mistake, Mel, it was difficult and it was challenging. But again, I remember at home, the first thing I did was I rang my father back in England that night, because I thought, he's going to have to bury his daughter here. You know, or not bury me literally, but he's going to lose a child. What must that be for a parent? So again, I went into that saving mode. I went into the default of what my mother trained me to do as a young girl. Let me fix my dad first. What the hell? And but nonetheless, it's compassion, and that's part of what I'm made of. So I tried to do that as best I could. And but what I did was, I knew my life was over as it was. So I thought, well, I need to move everything out of my life, because I don't need it anymore. Something else is over there that's waiting for me. It's a blank canvas. So I prepared as if I was going to die. And even though I knew I was going to live, I was being realistic. I could have, you know, I was being told by the medical field I was in denial. They put me into acceptance and commitment therapy because they thought it would. The only choice I was given for surgery was radical surgery, and I signed for it because I wanted this mass out of my body. But the only choice I was given was the removal of my voice box. And so I prepared for that. I'm fine, I can live without that. The other ways of communicating. And so I was working towards that happening. And then in the meantime, quickly it was like, I don't need this business. I don't need anything other than a roof over my head. So, and my husband didn't want so I said to him, do you want this if I die? If I die, because it's everything. But also I thought, although my life's done, if I do die, suddenly, I was 41 at the time. I don't want to leave him with a mess to clean up. I want to clean it up myself, you know, get my house in order, so that I know the pain of grief and loss. And I hadn't even started to grieve my mother's death or all these other friends I'd lost throughout my life at that point. But something was telling me I was preparing my husband to be able to have a peaceful road if I did die, because I thought he's gonna go through a journey. He doesn't need to be sorting out and finishing off my business and doing stuff, and he needs the time to reestablish his life. So I just eventually, I think it was probably about February, I decided to call all my staff in, because they loved it. They loved the business. And I had a meeting with them one night, and I just said, look, because I just disappeared, just completely disappeared when I was given the prognosis. And I went, just get on with everything. I'll see you in the new year. But I just needed to get my head around stuff. And they knew something was seriously wrong, because we were all there together and I just disappeared. And then I said, look, come on, I'm going to have a meeting. I'll put you straight. And it was a difficult thing to announce, to stand and tell these people you worked with and loved, and that were all out there doing goodness, healing people's lives, that this was happening. But I started with the assurance that I don't believe what I've been told, because something's happened. But I can't ignore it, because it could go the other way. But whatever happens, I need to let go of this company. And of course, we were only 3.5 years into a 5-year plan. And my accountants were like, you can't sell it, Di. There's nothing to sell. I went, I haven't put all this blood, sweat and tears in not to sell it. I'm not just going to close it down. This needs to carry on and carry on healing these people's lives. But my accountants were like, no, you can't sell it. Oh, stuff this. So I called a meeting and broke the company down into 3 different divisions and sold it internally to people. It was phenomenal. They continued on, did other things with it, and so it carried on and relieved me from it. And I made it a win-win. I needed it off my hands, so I made it sellable, and I needed to move it on fairly quickly. So, but it obviously took months to sell, because it was a business and what have you. But that released me from that side as well, and it allowed that work to carry on there. And early on, what happened in those first few weeks was, I've always been holistic, look what we've just been talking about, but this vortex just opened up, and it was, you could call it a miracle, you can call it what you want, you call it sliding doors, serendipity, call it definitely no coincidence. It was a series of events all through my life that brought me to this. And new holistic people came into my life. And like the medical oncology team, I thought they were doing the best for me, and they were phenomenal, and we'd got the operation booked and everything. So just so grateful. They were seeing me twice a week. It was phenomenal. But then when they put me into acceptance and commitment therapy, I went for it because I thought, if I am in denial, these two psychologists are going to get to the bottom of this. I wanted to know if I was kidding myself and if I was in denial. So I was like, well, I'll go, but I can't say if it's going to make any difference. But I'll tell you what, I'm open to realizing that, you know, I might be kidding myself here. So I went, and after 2 sessions, they went, you know something we don't, and
Wow.
you don't need to be here. So I thought, how beautiful and pragmatic was that? That from the scientific side of life, they knew I'd got 12 weeks. Well, there was a lot less by then, and they could have kept me in their system. But something in that exchange of humanity and compassion and intelligence and understanding, and all I was doing was explaining my experience, they heard that. And they, both of them said, you don't need to be here. You know something bigger. And I was like, thank you. And I really respect.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I had chills when you were saying that. I think that's really profound. And I think, again, going back a couple of decades, you know, it's for people who worked in that business to also be that tuned in and hear you, because there's so many clients who go to see the doctor or the psychiatrist or, you know, whoever in the field and aren't believed or seen as crazy or in denial, all of that stuff. So that's amazing. So in terms of treatment, what was your approach to
what
rid
happened
of the
while the psychotherapists in the acceptance and commitment therapy model understood and accepted and gave me permission to leave their space, if you like. So I did. My surgeon didn't. I was actually branded as the most difficult patient he'd ever dealt with, because twice a week he was hearing me say, now, hang on a minute, you've said all that, but whatever you do, just treat me as though I'm going to live. And it was just like, and he actually voiced, he overstepped the mark. It was another experience of driving around that roundabout, and I went, enough. And this was 11 hours before he was due to remove my voice box. He called a meeting with me, and he wanted to set the record straight and let me know how difficult I'd been. And I just realized that this brilliant surgeon is emotional about what I've presented to him. And I realized that for me to go on his operating table was not going to serve my life well. So I cancelled it. And thankfully I did, because I'm sat here talking to you. I'm 17 years later, I've still got my voice. And my life, I was in private counselling then, person-centred counselling. I had just naturally, I thought, the original doctor gave me 2 websites. One of them was a British cancer website. So I went on it. So everything was on there. It was a phenomenal website. It got all the clinical stuff, but then it had this section of all these stories and experiences that I remember a mother wrote in, and she'd been having a daughter treated for cancer, and she wanted to have a conversation with the doctor about how this particular supplement or massage had helped, or head massage or essential oils were just making a difference, or foods. But so they put a section on this website about all these, what I call holistic natural stories. And so it's a very brave thing to do. And they also relayed some of the experiences of when they presented this to the oncologist. Well, this is what we've done, and it's sort of, you know, working. It was a closed door. Yeah. And we know why it's a closed door, because of insurance and pharmaceutical companies and all the relationships and the knowledge that they have at that side. It's absolutely vast what they've got. It's just different to treating the person as a whole. Yeah. But my attention went from I absolutely knew at the first outset chemo and radio was not going to be an option for me, but I never voiced that. But my attention suddenly, this tiny little part on this website became the biggest part. So I'm reading all these stories and I'm like, it made so much sense going back years and years and years. And even my mother died of cancer. It made sense to the pieces of the jigsaw that was missing for her and her death. And so really early on, I thought, I didn't eat red food. I just did not eat red food. And the only red food I would eat would be beef, tomatoes when I went to Europe. And of course, now I'm living in Australia. So they didn't do beef tomatoes from Spain in Australia. So I just didn't eat red food. But on this website, it was like, for cancer to eliminate, it's red. So I was like, oh, so I got my gardener and I'm like, clear all those trees. So we completely cleared one side of the garden. I thought, I'm just going to grow my own. And I mean,
Wow.
we're in the most pristine climate on the planet. And I thought, I'm just going to grow my own. I'm not even doing packets. So we always bought fresh food, but you know, you buy a packet of tomatoes. But I said, it's got to be red. So it was gorgeous. And he's like, Di. I went, no, it's going to help. And then whatever's left over, we can just feed the neighbours and that. So I started growing my own food. I didn't, Jack did it for me. But fruit and veg, and then I'd cultivate stuff and prepare it for the winter. That was a whole beautiful, beautiful turning point. More of everything. Holistic people came in. I'd got this brilliant counsellor who introduced me to an educational program, and she was the one who identified really early on that I had not grieved my mother's death. Wow. And I was so fortunate that she introduced me to this program that she was delivering that opened up a whole different world altogether of these professional people who took me under their wing from one professional to another. And obviously I went through my healing journey and I knew what I was in, but it's mindfulness, meditation, educational retreats on grief and loss and the psychological approaches to life. And as I moved through that, which was over a period of a long, I just felt at home and really safe with all of these people, and the wisdom that came was phenomenal. And then they asked me if I wanted to be part of it. So I eventually transitioned into being educated in their programs. And so I was just like, oh, I know loads of people who this will help. So I was bringing people together, and they went, Di, do you want to help us? I went, absolutely. If I put the kettle on, I'm not bothered what I do. But I ended up educating and being trained and then delivering their programs. And then they formally invited me to train me to become a mindful instructor, which is what I did.
Oh, wow.
That was the fundamental, and that was by a group of secular nuns. So it was beautiful, because all denominations were included. You know, I love what Prince Charles has brought to this coronation. The keeper of faith, you know, that's been the tradition for as far back as the start of writing history, hasn't it? But Prince Charles has gone, I'll be the keeper of all faiths. And when I heard, and I'm getting a lump in my throat now thinking of that, because it doesn't matter what we've come from and who we've come from and what religions we've been raised in. It doesn't matter what, if I see somebody, I don't see the colour of their skin. I never have done. It's other people that bring it to my attention. I'm like, how did you notice that? You know, it doesn't matter what colour or creed or background or religion. My experience, religion, sometimes the boundary too tight, they hold the person back, but it's everybody has and deserves the same value who is born onto this planet. And I really, really respect that Prince Charles, again, has stepped out, is a thought leader, way advanced for his time, and I don't believe he's got enough credit for what is brought to our environment and the Commonwealth and the changes that he's made across the planet. But when I actually heard him voice, I'll be the keeper of all faith. Yeah, he's our king, but that takes courage, because he's faced a whole country of people who could have just revoked him for that. And he's done it. And I understand that courage. You know, I'm not royalty, I'm not thing, but I really respected and appreciated that. And I thought, these are the changes that we need to bring, the changes to be the change, isn't it? You know?
Yeah. Because for me, whatever religion somebody has, and like you say, you can have religions that are too tight, like cultures that are too tight, and then some that are looser. But there's something about having a framework, and again, coming out of the psychology, positive psychology field, is this real need that if people have got faith and trust and hope, that no matter what circumstances they face and that experience they can get through, it's loss of faith and hope. And the sort of toxic cocktail is, if you haven't got that and you sink into meaninglessness and purposelessness, that's then the rest, that's where people go down the track and feel suicidal. So, and in all my work, I worked in a lot of schools over 20 years ago, but the one school I took a contract from, even though I'm not a religious person, but I liked working in there because I liked the ethos and the faith, was a Catholic school. And I just saw something about the ethos and faith that the kids were growing up in, this sense of community. And I know all religions and cultures, there's all sorts of stuff that go in the news and all, you know, whole different layer of society where things go on. But that's what I was seeing, that when the kids I come into contact with had something that they could pin their beliefs, ideas and ideals on, the ones that struggled, the kids that struggled, is where they weren't brought up like that, where they would get a bit lost and a bit mixed up and confused. But yeah, it's amazing when you can, it's almost like, you know, in spiritual quarters, they talk about we live in the 3D world, and that is where you get caught in this idea of polarity and you live according to the culture or faith that you've been brought in. But when you're moving up into your own 5D world, is when you're surpassing the previous notions of and conditioning of who you think you are, and that you're not your role, you're not your gender, you're not those things. And that's quite a step forward for a lot of people to make. But to have that, because that's how you're coming across to me, that, you know, you held that deep knowing within yourself, that deep something that surpasses the mainstream culture at the time, the medical system, the people around you, because often people can tap into their own fear and say, no, you must do this treatment, no, you must do, because it's right for them and they're scared. And so being that rebel, or like you say, the black sheep in the family at that time, are the gifts as well, aren't they? Often people live with that and think it's a really negative experience, but actually what you're doing is totally tapping into what's right for you. And that does take courage, faith and hope. It takes all of that. And that's what I'm hearing as you talk, that continuous expression of being able to remodel yourself, you know, and leave something behind that's working. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think I was raised with a religion, and I remember at a very, very early age, I was pulling on my mum's shirt tails one day, and I went, what have you got us in this school for, and going to church and all this jazz? She went, because it's structure, you know. It's structure. And out of all the choices, this is going to give you a safer start when you're not in my company. It's going to be the safest place for you when we were at school or at wherever. And I was like, wow, I probably was only about 7 or 8 when I asked her that question. And thought, wow, how beautiful is that? Even although it wasn't serving me, because even at a very young age, I was confused with what we were being trained in this religion and the behavior. It didn't match up. So what I was being trained in the scriptures sounded like it was full of love. But then you looked and turned and got caught up in the behavior. It was like, well, you're doing that, but that ain't what you're trained. That ain't what you. And I was like, well, there's something wrong. And I daren't tell my mother what was happening on a behavioural scale when we weren't with her, because we all had it drummed into as a family. Any police knock at our door, you're going to have me to deal with. None of my children are going to cause any trouble. If you do anything out there in society that is not good towards anybody else, woe betide the day you'll wish you weren't breathing because you're going to have me to deal with. She was incredible, and she was surviving her life, and she was managing 6 of us, and so it didn't matter what were going on outside. It was in my frame was, if I go back and tell her that I've been beat up in this environment, she's going to think I've done something to induce that. So I chose to be silent. But by the time I got to 19, I'd left the building. But I did make serious efforts to go and talk to that establishment, just to not blame her, just to have, can you explain what this is? And nobody was available until one day. I'd left a few years when finally became in company with somebody who was directly connected to the Pope, and I was in a position to have a conversation, and it was it answered a lot, but it still didn't give. It wasn't enough for me to come back, and I think by then I'd established a deeper sense of who I was, and also that I realised, because I was asked the question, do you believe, somebody asked me one day, do you believe in God? And I went, well, I do believe in God, but it's not what's written in a book or what I said it, and now, and it were a great question, because it made me realise and own what was happening for me at that moment. And I went, I actually think there's a God within me. Yeah, my God lives within me, and that's remained ever since. Whatever that God is, probably my soul. I've never gone in and explored that, but it's enough. It is enough.
It works for you.
It brings me truth. It brings me settlement. It brings me wisdom. It brings me everything. It brings me everything I need to live my life. And alerts me when I need to be on my game, and careful, and to create some change, or to pull back, or because we can be in fear. We can have positive fear. Fear can be healthy, and it can, but the majority of the time when you're coming from your thinking brain, it's a negative fear, and that's what keeps people held back. Because I think from somewhere else other than this. I think from my soul, which is what my own life has actually taught me to do, and worked really hard at getting my attention until I finally did that. Fear is fascinating. Fear is part of it, but I know what realm of fear I'm in, and if I'm in what we would know as fear, I know I'm coming from this brain, so I just take myself back,
recognize,
come back home to myself, and bring the meditations in, and actively become more conscious about being mindful, and coming home to myself, and doing what I do on my outside world, which is bringing more holistic home to me. And that could be just literally sitting at that desk and just switching off and just going into a few second meditation and just being thankful, grateful for this life.
Yeah, and all the simple steps really that are actually, again, quite potent, that if you understand yourself well enough, and you understand your own rhythms, and what works for you, and what repels you, and what expands you, what lights you up, these are all the elements, when you bring them all together, aren't they? Like sitting at your desk. I bought this chair when I started working from home more, because it leans right back. So sometimes in the day when the house is really quiet, I can just go right back in the chair, lie back. And I love the way that I'm supported, and I'll put some frequency music on and just have those 5 minutes or 20 minutes or something, because I've learned you can't push through the fatigue. You can't keep going when your brain needs to operate in a different way. So the more you know yourself and how you function and how you work, and have those sound bites and those times out, especially if, and I was listening to some people talk over these podcasts this week, especially if you're a type A personality, and then if your star sign like mine is a Taurus, it's a combination of pushing until your legs have fallen off, and that's how I've stopped doing things in the past. You know, it had to be something extreme. And that's what I was hearing as a theme this week of, you know, how we don't necessarily notice the subtle signs and symbols around us that flash up that say you need to slow down, you need to stop, you need, you know, and you keep going and going and going until something gives, whether our health gives, or, you know, relationship, or you lose your job or something like that. And the universe, like you said earlier, you know, the universe will just make something happen if you're not seeing the signs. So that's absolutely fascinating journey, Dan. And we've talked before, but I think the insights and awareness that every one of those experiences that you've had and all the people you've come into contact with are so valuable, you know, in terms of what people need to hear, even you know, even some aspects, let alone all of it. But you clearly came back to the UK and got yourself back on track. Was that when you were saying that you were closing that chapter and you were closing your candle business down? Was that then you know?
No, that was just one, that was clearing down to look at this blank canvas. And
Right.
so what happened next was, over a period of the following couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years, well, maybe a bit longer, we ended up, me and my husband ended up leaving Western Australia because he wanted to move to the eastern states. And so it took me 2 years to decide to say yes, because living in Western Australia suited every single cell in my body. And I knew I'd visited it before I emigrated, and I had a profound experience that told me I was going to live there, you know. And so I did, and here I am leaving because my husband wanted to go to the eastern states. And I will share with you the reason why we chose to move, why he chose to move, and I eventually went with it, because I think it's so important. Again, people get locked in their own lives, and this sacred thing called marriage can also, as beautiful as it can be, people can get stuck because of this routine or expectation or fear base, you know. And our marriage was actually over, and as a decoy, my husband wanted to move to the other side of Australia, 6,000 kilometers away. Wow. And start again. And I was like, I just can't see this happening, because I knew how he operated. And that's not a criticism. I'm prepared to share this to hopefully bring some light to a situation if anybody's listening to this afterwards. But here's the thing. I was trained to put everybody else first, and I created a brilliant life for him, for us to have. And it just took me 2 years to say yes, I would go, because my cells, I think, actually went into a bit of trauma, because it was like, how can I leave here? I'm going to be thrown in with the dolphins when I die. I was absolutely home and dry. Nothing in my psyche ever told me I would leave there. But because he requested it and said, let's do this, it was just like, so I had the conversations with him, you know, if you seriously think, Glenn, because if you're not going to come back into this marriage, you know, I'm giving up an absolute perfect life. We could just part company here and be friends. And I brought loads of different choices to it. And no, can't do it here. But if we go over there, it'll all happen. Wow. So obviously it's personal reflection again. And I thought, we're looking at his life, and I thought perhaps he needs that experience. You know, what about him in this? You know, it's not just an ending. It's not about one person when there's 2 people in it. It's about 2 people. And so anyway, we moved, and I knew within 3 days that I had sort of been led into a false sense of security, which was fine. But then it's like, well, where do I go next? So to cut a long story short, that climate did not suit me, and we'd only been there a few months, and we got caught up in some major flooding that lots and lots of people lost their lives. It was horrific. And I realised that how it affected me, well, I ended up traumatised by it, because we were evacuated, didn't know a soul. And we were evacuated, our house flooded, but we didn't lose our lives. So very, very fortunate. But I think the trauma of that didn't help the whole situation. But here I am, you know, I'm the one who makes things happen. So I just thought, well, where do we go? You can't just move again. And so I thought, right, I'll put a plan together. I knew I was going to open a business there. So I went to work for somebody else for a while I got my head around things, because I knew it was the end of Australia as well. And I wasn't sort of planning on that, because I'd flown back to Perth a few times to think, I should have come back, and just knew that I didn't need to go back there neither. Something kept telling me, just move around, just wherever you go, just move. So I was open, there was no direction of where to go, I was just open, but you know. And so I put, and again, another 5-year plan in place. And I opened, so by then I thought, right, I'm going to bring everything together. So I opened a centre of wellbeing for hairdressing, beauty therapy and holistic therapy, and brought everything together under one roof. And it was gorgeous. We were right on the beach, so we were running like mini retreats and stuff as well, and all this stuff going on in house. It was lovely. And that's what I wanted to do in England in the 90s. And you know, it never happened, but it happened here. And but I knew the end was there, and we were still in one another's lives, and we needed to release one another from our lives. I wasn't going to go back to Perth, and the Eastern States wasn't the place that I needed to be. It just didn't suit my cellular response. So, and I couldn't figure out what he was going to do, and he couldn't, because he wasn't a thinker. And so one day I just said to him, do you want to go back home? Because all his family were in Yorkshire. Would you like to go home and do this there? And that was the first positive response that I got from him. So I went, right, okay. So I opened this centre, and what took about a year to find. And I accomplished, the 5-year plan was accomplished in just under 4 years. So I put it up for sale and sold it. And the day that I got paid for it, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and God bless him. I mean, we'd sold our house then, and we were living with some friends who said, just come and stay with us. And, you know, when you're in this flux. So we were staying with some friends. So we were ready to go. And I was just waiting to get the money from the sale of this business. And so when I got the money, I said to him, you go bank that. And he went, we'll go home and have dinner. I went, we're not. I said, no, I've waited 4 years for this. And I said, we need to move now. So I said, go bank the money. I'll meet you in the travel agents. And we were on a plane out of Australia at 9 o'clock that night. Like, wow. We did a trip, you know, did Hong Kong and a few other places on the way back. But that was us emigrating back to the UK. And so I came back with my private mindset therapy coaching and group work in mindfulness, and also my educational retreats. That's what I thought, I'll just bring that the UK will be taken care of with wellbeing festivals. And how wrong was I? I found myself exhibiting in either corporate or mind, body and spirit events. And well-being, there's something really pragmatic about well-being, and it's because we've got the science behind it. It's because we've got the universe behind it. It's because it's holistic. It doesn't treat, if you've got a broken shoulder, holistic doesn't treat the broken shoulder. It treats the whole of the person to heal the shoulder. And neither of corporate or MBS were bringing me this pragmatism around this, the structure and the fundamentals and the vastness of what well-being truly is. And after about a year of exhibiting, like the wrong audience, you know, it just wasn't serving me. And I thought, perhaps there might be a place for my festival here. And with that, I started looking at it and planning and preparing, and I launched my first wellbeing festival in the UK in the north of England in March 2017, and then brought it, part of the plan was to bring it to Surrey, excuse me, which I did in 2018. And then of course we did it again, and then the pandemic came, and here we are. So I'm at the foot of what will be our 9th festival in Surrey next month.
Wow. So have you noticed much change since you got involved in the whole holistic alternative business and then started doing the wellbeing events? Because I agree, I've seen I've been going to the Mind, Body and Spirit festivals for about 8 years, and wasn't really about wellbeing, even though you'd get aromatherapy, you get candles, you get things like that. And then the corporate world, I think maybe 5-10 years, has been as integrated mindfulness and coaching within that system, but still very fragmented aspects. And I used to feel like I was fragmented because I had my psychotherapy work, I had my corporate work, and then I had my hippie self that was almost closeted, unless I went to the Mind, Body and Spirit event where I could buy my crystals, buy the aromatherapy, buy all that stuff. And it feels like my journey over the last say 5-6 years was to integrate that so that I could start tapping into that. No matter who I come into contact with, I can then, respond to the person like what you were experiencing and what they need, whether that's mindfulness or yoga or meditation or crystals or, kinesiology or whatever. But did you notice much change or difference, or how the world was started? Because you were definitely at the forefront of something that well before it was even entering most people's consciousness.
Have I noticed change? It's a different experience in the Northern Hemisphere to what it is in the Southern Hemisphere.
Right.
And I think that comes back to the lifestyle, because we have so much here, don't we? I mean, you could pack 49 hours into a 24-hour day in England because there's so many choices for people. But choices are distractions. Right. And the distractions from the soul, from the person. And I know because I've lived it, and I've had to go on that journey of, I thought I was going to partly retire in Australia, but I didn't. I actually went to heal my life. Now I'm on the other side of it. That was my journey, but I just thought I'll retire, half on the beach, but no, something else. And being away gave me the opportunity, because I went to the most isolated city on the planet, and somehow that just suited me. Nobody was there. It was 17 and a half times the size of the UK with 2 million people in it. I mean, we've got probably more, I don't know how many we've got in Surrey, but it's more than that. And but 17 and a half times the size of the UK with 2 million people, and a relatively new country. There's a low footprint. They haven't got the historical. Of course they have, with the Aboriginal culture of what the foundation of Australia is about, but they've not got the numbers of footprint, what's gone before us on there, the resonance, the history and everything, like what we have here. And of course, it's quite a soulful place, so it's not filled with stuff. It's about the person and about the environment. Whereas here, we've got so many distractions, and of course, we're trained differently, so avoidance, unconscious avoidance is so easy in the Northern Hemisphere, because we've got so many beautiful things that we can add to our lives to fill the gap, so we don't have to think about what we actually nearly need for our lives.
Wow, that's quite a contrast then that you're exploring there, because everything can be a distraction, can't it? And we can fill our lives up. And I certainly know that during lockdown, I think apart from the sort of negative impact that people felt, is it actually gave a lot of people a lot of opportunity to realize that everything they were invested in, whether it was taking their kids to clubs every day, 5 days a week, or, the marriage they were in, or the job that they were doing, it became a whole big process of reviewing. And you can review when you're not running around everywhere, where you are at home more. And maybe that was on a much larger scale of what individually people who took the spiritual path, because even though you've not said it was a spiritual path, the path of the soul is the spiritual journey, isn't it, of finding out who you are and what your role in the world is, and like you said, connecting people and introducing people to, on larger scale, all these things. But Yeah, the sort of modern curse in a way is the amount of distraction, the TV, the gaming, the going, to the pub, or getting caught in things that you've done because you always do it. Like
And
we
of
grew up in a
course,
culture.
yeah, and regardless of our journey, we've all got elements of pain within inside us. And the first thing
Yeah,
people need to do, which is a normal response, is to have a fix.
yeah,
And that might be buying clothes to fix, shopping, food. We turn to all these external, what I call stuff,
yeah,
to numb the pain. It all
yeah,
happens on different levels for all of us.
yeah,
And I'm not saying everybody's in pain, but I'm just saying, and of course we need, I'm sat here clothed. I've had to buy, well, I haven't actually, this was a gift. Both of these was a gift actually. I don't buy much stuff, I don't go shopping, doesn't interest me. But we're cultured to put band-aids on the front of what's going on. And we can't live, and I say to some people I know who are like in therapy all the time, or they're in healing, give yourself a break. It's a difficult road, is healing your own life. And it's exhausting sometimes, but it's freaking magical, because the light isn't there. The light isn't by staying where you are when you've outgrown your life. The light is by going to the dark to get to the light. But it can be an exhausting journey, and for some, stepping onto that, it can be really frightening. This is why people hold on, and this is why people go shopping, and why people have to have this and have to have that, and I'll go on a bending holiday and get drunk every day instead of going on an educational retreat. And this is not a criticism, it's how we are trained in the Western world to look externally for gratification, to make us feel better, rather than going on the inward journey. And like the opportunity I created was the festival, which was launched in March 2017, to fly the flag for wellbeing, to present a toolkit for people to open up all these avenues, so that people could learn to get a wider grasp on what well-being is, whether that's sat doing a painting, or having a mindful experience, or having a conversation that you wouldn't normally have, what we call difficult conversations, creating space for that. There's always a space within my festival where people can sit in silence in a festival, because it's the silence that makes the difference. And if that nobody goes in there, that's fine, but we've created a choice, and we can live without stuff, but we need stuff as well. It's about coming away from the conditioning of that. And globally, doesn't matter where I've been, from being very, very young, the people who have come into my life who are working in holistic fields have had and have the most beautiful, incredible creations, whether that is product, because there's no chemicals in it. They're coming from Mother Nature and Mother Earth, what is 100% conducive to the human genome. So again, if you're lighting a candle or putting skincare on, or at this festival we've got coming up, we've got a girl who's bringing vegan perfume, no chemicals in this perfume, and it's incredible. And you're just like, why spray a chemical on your skin to smell nice, to impress, when you can just choose and know that there's an option there, what's not going to upset the person who's wearing it. And bringing to the attention of people, this is well-being, that's well-being, whether it's coaching, whether it's creating space to do artwork, whether it's a mindfulness experience. And then of course the training that comes from holistic therapies is phenomenal, because we're not dealing with textbook stuff. They've created the textbooks, but we're dealing with being able to have the philosophies of ancient traditions. Some of them go back hundreds of thousands of years, and the work, the principles work, whether it's cognitive, physical, or spiritual, or emotional. The same practices still work today. And fortunately, we've got people who have found an interest in these ancient methodologies that have proven to work, and they're bringing that into a modern society. And one of the other things I love, I am for tradition, and I think we're a nation of steeped in tradition. We've only to look at what's happened this last weekend with the coronation and the traditions. It brings a sense of groundedness and satisfaction to our communities and our own life and environment. But with holistic natured therapies and the professionals within that, what never ever ceased to amaze me, and it really excites me inside, is when somebody's taken a model that works. And of course, with holistic therapists, they tend to have an awful lot of knowledge because they won't be trained in one field. It becomes a journey.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they can have 4 or 5 different crucial models that they're trained in. And then out of all of that, they'll create something else, that they'll take the best from what their experiences, from all these different interventions that are proven already to have worked without causing any upset to the human system. And then they have somehow, through their wisdom and through their soul calling or whatever it is, or creativeness, they'll try and test and start to blend, and it brings something much greater. And
That's interesting.
That really turns me on, because you can just, on the outside, the depth of the passion on the inside, because holistic is not surface stuff. If you open a bottle of essential oil, your cell, 80 trillion cells are turned on. It's as simple as that. It's not difficult stuff, but it's going to make a difference to your life. And not only have we got people who are following traditions, and they're there and they bring in this aspect in all different flavors, whether that's perfume, skincare, healing therapies. We've got a guy coming who's going to train people how to breathe properly. I mean, it's something the human system does 24/7, but it's going to train people how to breathe properly. And I went, I get it. Bring it on, let's do it. From an ancient traditional ritual method. But bringing it into today's modern world, it just really excites me, and I think the fundamental thing around it is, if it doesn't work for you, if it doesn't do any good, it won't do you any harm. But here's the human system is designed to heal and live and flourish with everything from Mother Earth. And that's not a hugging tree decision or a woo-woo decision. It's I've experienced it. I'm living proof, I'm absolutely living proof. Over a period of, from being 4, I came aware of something was wrong when I ate cornflakes. What's that? Oh yeah, gluten intolerance, and all these things. But then I had to discover that 20 odd years later, but I can bring people together. And I think perhaps it's part of my quest, just creating a community around me. And I've kept, I've moved twice away from communities, but it's about that gathering and bringing that together. And of course, my experience being given 12 weeks to live with one choice for radical surgery and told that this is it and you need to get real, your thinking's not right, you're in denial. And I just kept rising above it. And then a year or 2 later, I was working with a private client and I thought, I can't be the only one. And I wasn't the only one, because 2 other people had come to me after that and said, they'd actually heard what had happened to me. And one of them found me and made a phone call and said, can you help? And so I did. And I still do. People like who's experienced similar things to me actually come into my life, and I work with them in a private setting, because it's all about belief. If anybody tells me they've been given a prognosis, the first question I say is, do you think you're going to die or live? People don't even ask that question, but I can ask it because I'm qualified to receive the answer, so that then I can support that journey going along. But people need to know there's other alternatives, and they need the best. I'm not one for fluffing around, and because I know how quickly holistic interventions can change people's lives for the better. but there's a journey in that. So like with all our business community that come together, and it's different every time, it's just incredible that everybody is really coming from the highest source, and the trust that's in there, because I know everybody who engages with our business community, there'll be a journey that's born from that. I need to know, it's my selfish, but I need to know as a therapist and as a human being who cares about people, that they're going to be in safe hands when those doors close. And that's why I interview everybody before they come in. So yeah, and we're 4 weeks off that. So
well,
and you're part of it as well, Mel.
yes, I will be. But
delighted to say you bring in a plethora of years of experience, aren't you? So I'm really, really looking forward to what you're.
Yeah, well, equally, you know, and I'll talk about this another time, but equally, I've been on a path of exploring so many different approaches, and some of it, like you say, personal journeys, because I had 2 sick children, you know, one in and out of hospital all the time, and I had to find a range of approaches to help him manage the trauma of the hospitalizations, as well as, you know, just get his lungs working properly. And my other son is diabetic, and you know, and I learned early on, like you were talking about bread, and you know, now we know about gluten-free, but we didn't back then. I learned early on when my son was 5 and ended up being diagnosed with diabetes, and giving him injections every day and having to monitor his blood, how quickly the body responded when I gave him 2 biscuits in comparison to a Mars bar, because we were monitoring his blood all the time, and our life was wrapped around that. But I found it fascinating. That's when I started seeing how the very subtle changes and things that I brought in influenced, as well as monitoring. You know, if you could, like now we would do those things at home, back then you couldn't. So yeah, I think a lot of people who were on what we did know as alternative paths, holistic therapy, complementary therapy, have been on a journey, often because they stumbled across something that was about helping them, and they want to share that passion and that love. And equally with the therapies, you know, I explored, and you talked about person-centered therapy. I explored person-centered therapy initially because that was the basic training, and you know, getting to a stage of, well, it's all very well knowing what the past is about, but then I liked the NLP and hypnosis, think, well, how can we change our future? How can we redirect our lives? And when you realize that you have that potential and you can do that and break free of the you know, the perceived limitations that we've grown up in, it becomes fascinating. So I think we're sort of talking about the same desire, really, which is to help educate people to realize that there are so many possibilities out there that actually now, and I'm watching webinars with psychiatrists who are saying, you know, there was a psychiatrist I was listening to a couple of weeks ago who trained in Reiki and had a similar experience to me as to how I got into Reiki, because he was working in prisons and he noticed that his energy was being affected every time he come into contact with someone, and he couldn't figure out why he felt angry, tired, you know, for all of these different experiences he was having. So he went to see a Reiki practitioner and learned about that. And, you know, so it's all these stories that are starting to emerge now.
Education is key, isn't it?
It is massively. But the blending of what I get excited about is that I can see that now we're not demonizing, like the scientific community isn't demonizing these approaches, because the research is coming through in mindfulness and meditation and yoga and aromatherapy. We know about that, and hypnosis, all of these different approaches. So I'm excited to be part of your event, most definitely, and thank you, because we even though I've known about your work for a long time, we met only a few months ago, and see everything that's going on there. So before we finish, I do want to ask you about the Academy and what you're going to have coming up. But also, I would love to have another conversation, because you were describing the dark night of the soul, which is a concept that sits often with spiritual conversations. So I'd love to explore that with you on another time and take a deeper dive down that journey. But tell us about the work that you do to support professionals in the academy that you're going to be offering out.
Yeah, well, I created that in the pandemic because obviously I realized the social separation was going to change everybody's central nervous system for a start, and it can't always necessarily come back. So it's about, and I understand cellular work. That's what I do for mindset. I call it mindset coach, but it's cellular. So I realized, I mean, catastrophic. Who's closed the world down ever? And all these business people, they're going to be scrambling to stay who they are. They've no choice but to change. And they're going to make that change on their own without any professional help or development, or very little, because everybody's funds were affected as well. And of course, in my private work, when the pandemic hit, that became even more exacerbated. I had time to help people on a one-to-one basis because I'd lost my festival to the pandemic. And the pattern that was coming through, everybody was just absolutely, and understandably so, in fear, heightened fear. And how am I going to save my future? How am I going to save my family? How am I going to save my business? How do you do this anymore? And then it's like, after 12 months of the ridiculousness of the pandemic, I thought that we need a structure. The business, because it's business community, I work business to business and business to consumer. And, you know, so I thought they're going to need a platform to help, a safe and trusted platform. And I've got lots of experience, life experience, as well as all the work that I do. And obviously I'm an educator, that I've always brought that into everything that I've done. So I pulled all my educational retreats and programs and mindfulness and mindset, just put it all together and thought, right, what would I need if I was absolutely broken and my business and coming out the other side? But of course, my clients were showing me all of this as well. So I was collecting that data and then looking at how I would want to, what kind of person and what program would I want to help me move forward that's affordable and doable as well, without, again, a win-win. That's what I do. So I created Diane Mitchell Wellbeing Academy, and it's a program for, ideally, I've had private people in there building, changing the lives and building the lives of it, but ideally it's for small to medium-sized business owners who want the inner alignment, who want to know who they are. You know, so it's ideal for people who are in business, who they've got edginess, or it's not quite working, or they don't even know what they're doing. A lot of people go into business because it's a hobby, not because they're trained in business. That comes with the development and all the rest of it down the line, but they don't know what they're doing. And that's not a criticism neither. They've gone in with passion, but not the knowledge. And so I've put a whole program together where we start and do the inner work. You know, outer changes always begin within. So I take them on an inner journey of discovery of who they are and connecting with that. It's quite a pragmatic approach because they're living it week by week. And once we've done all the inner journey and sorted out and moved out what they don't need in the mind and cleared that up and brought to the forefront a whole, call it mind, body, soul plan, if you like, of absolute balance of who they are and identification with who they are, then build your business model on who you are. So making all those decisions about the values, what the cellular response is from a sensory life to the logical side of it as well, but coming from your truth, which is 99.8%. So I teach people how to think differently. I teach them how to think away from the thinking brain to bring the truth, the 99.8% truth. Then there's no second guessing. There's no, you know, you're not living in fear. So, but to bring all that collective for the inner human and apply that to a business model, they're going to be joyous and happy. And they are joyous and happy because they're making decisions based on a 99.8% accuracy of what's right for them. Excuse me. I must have been talking for a long time. not on external expectations. So they bring a business model that's completely different in sensing and feeling and stature, because when you're coming from your true self, there's no second guessing. So that brings a hell of a lot of grounding. And then so it's an 8-week program that I deliver in small groups. And then after the 8 weeks, it's specific, you get all the workbooks and everything, but it's an experiential experience. And then after the 8 weeks, we have a reconnector, call it a masterclass, I call it a reconnector, every fortnight, where we all come together, because after the 8 weeks, they're then starting to put the business plan into place. But if you just let people go at that stage, they need support and care and assistance, and they'll need more knowledge, because as soon as they step into decision making, you're opening up a whole new world of new needs. So it's a 6-month span altogether. So every 2 weeks we come together online. It's all online, and then we thrash out where people are at, what support they need, how does it work for them, what do they need, and I just coach them through their journey. And I do that for 6 months, and sometimes things come up that everybody might need to learn. You know, I've put other programs together in the support coaching classes as well, in the reconnectors, because it's quickly become identified that they might need something simple or something complex to help them run their business. And if the majority of the people are needing that, or they're open to learning that, I'll just put another workshop together and train them in that as well. So as yet, I've not needed to bring any other business professionals in to support the needs of the group. But if that was the case, I'm surrounded by professionals on all sorts of levels. So it's personal and business development for them to align themselves to be able to get the business that they want in line, and then step into that, whether it's working on one facet of the business or a new business launch altogether. It's all possible, you know. And then as they're moving through that, if they need other things, training models, then I just bring it in and deliver it. And everything's recorded so they can tap into it at any time. So the next launch for that is the end of June. So yeah. So if anybody's looking for personal development and business development over a 6-month period, and to be handheld through that and nurtured and encouraged and with pragmatic approaches, then this is the course, and it's called Design the Life That You Truly Desire.
Oh, wonderful. I love that. That sounds absolutely amazing, actually, and so aligned with everything that you learned and did, that you now are passing on to other people, which is often the best way to do that. So would they get in contact, just send you an email? If I put the email on the podcast, they could contact you.
Yeah, I'll give you my email for them to contact. I've also got, although my main website is wonderfulworldofwellbeing.com, that's what I call a collective. It's about the festivals, it's about our online holistic providers on there. It's what I want it to be, which is obviously a lot. It's the whole thing.
Yeah.
I've got my private website as well, which is dianemitchellmindsetwellbeing.org. So I'll give you those details, and then people can check into that, because on that website I have on there my work for Wonderful World of Wellbeing, but it's about the program and it's about the private mindset work that I do. So we'll pop that website on there, and then they can have a look at all of my work that I do, and including my educational retreats as well.
That sounds absolutely amazing. And I guess anyone who wants to go and experience any of those therapies and meet you can go to your event that's happening on the, have I got the dates right? 17th
and 18th of June. Yeah, it's Wellbeing is the New Currency Festival on the 17th and 18th of June at Kempton Park Racecourse in Surrey. So we'll probably put that website underneath as well, because people will, you know, they can access tickets from our website. They can click straight through, and there'll be about 90 exhibitors to 100 all different types of health and well-being. And so it's a great exploration of showing people the vastness of true well-being and all different facets of that. And then, of course, we've got all the breakout zones with over 50 classes, talks, workshops, experiences. And I finish with experiences because it is experiences that change lives. And one of the strap lines we work with for the festival is changing lives one festival at a time.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to being there, because similar idea, which is introducing people to all the different aspects of well-being, and how even in, you know, the clinical world, they know that you can have mental health issues, but you still need to focus on your well-being. You know, the two are interchangeable now.
It's not one or the other, it's both, isn't it? And, and that's what, and I mean, brilliant, because you're bringing that, you're showing people the options, aren't you? You know, as well as other, you know, you're bringing yoga as well, but you're actually showing and presenting people the steps into this, the choices they've got. So it's a toolkit, they're being given a toolkit coming from all sorts of sources, you know. And like I said at the beginning, you know, that we're so fortunate that we've got the backing we have, and the ability from the NHS and the Medicare system all over the world, and all what has been created there over the years. But it's one part of it, and this is the other side. And but when people get that they've got choices, and they're armed with information and a toolkit, and they're surrounded with building the network of professionals that they can tap into if they ever need it, you know. They might not need it, but of course they're going to need it, because we're living in a world now, it's forever changed, and never before as individual well-being and compassion and care for ourselves ever been as important on the planet as what it is right now. And even if people still want to ignore it, they're not walking away from it, because it's just more so, you know. Unfortunately, people like yourself and everybody involved as a collective are bringing that opportunity for people to up-level their lives again and be armed and leave with a toolkit and experiences that are going to change their life for the better.
And also what I'm really keen to help people learn is, don't wait for a crisis or the world to fall apart before you start focusing on what can help you. And it's coming through you know, NHS systems, you know, the people realize the system's buckling because people often wait, ignore the signs and don't take action. And that actually there isn't a right path. There's just a path for you right now that you can explore. And the other aspects of that is helping people to tune in, like what you've been able to do for a long time, and use their emotional radar, which is why we've got emotions, to sense check something that you gravitate towards. And people will sometimes ask me, I had a client ask me a few weeks ago, do you know anything about crystals? And I said, well, yeah, there's a crystal Bible there that you can get on Amazon. However, walk up to the crystals and see which crystal you want to pick up, and then go and look at what might be the meaning of that crystal, because that's your innate inner knowing that is choosing that for you. And you need to bypass your thought process of, shall I have this crystal because it makes you do X, Y, and Z? And that's my approach with anybody really, that, you know, it's tapping into that innate knowing, which your story absolutely beautifully identifies. And I love the way that you have clearly had some horrible experiences that at the time, you know, but the way that you view that through this really magnificent lens of understanding and compassion. And as you say, we're starting to realize now that, like what you did early on, the acceptance and compassion therapy, which is still only just making headway now. It's been around a long time.
Acceptance and commitment therapy.
Yeah. And that really going full circle is you know, years ago, you didn't think like this. The cultural northern idea was that you just get on with it and you suffered until your body broke down. And now we don't have to do that as society. Now we can consider what we want as a sovereign being, to tune into our own healing methodology or our own healing system, but utilize those that have come before us that can help us do that. And I think if there's a time that's more important than any, is now, because I see the data in the mental health system. I see kids going through the systems who are suffering and families suffering. And I don't believe that people have to suffer to the degree that they do. And that's why I'm always about creating some really simple tools. And I'm not talking about serious mental health issues, because that's usually when somebody has had something going on for a long time and there's a lot of trauma. And
well, if we take hold of our self and be courageous enough to step out, it saves I could have been anywhere else with my mental health now, because experience has changed lives. Now the experience that I want to create, and experiences, because we've got a lot lined up that's not even on the website, is hopefully going to change everybody's life in a positive way in how they respond and received at the festival. But experiences do change lives, and it's this sequence of the difficult experiences that take people into these dark places, and that affects the mental health, and then the pain becomes too much and it can turn into addictions or different disorders, personality disorders, with that when they're only coming from here, from the thinking brain, and they're not connected to the feelings and emotions, it takes over and they become disconnected. And it's very sad when that happens, because it's a long and a lot more difficult journey to come back and get into the soul and wake all the cells up, you know. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, for really what I call deep mental health problems, is, you know, the interventions that are presented with that are antidepressants and a plethora of drugs that then affect and cause numbing sometimes. And I'm not a medic, so I'm not predicting anything. I'm just talking from
well, the research is showing that actually in most cases we shouldn't be giving people medication for more than 3 months. It should only really be used in crises. And what I've seen, because my friend, a colleague I've worked with for over 9 years now, and she works with high-end and medium-end clients who are in the adult mental health system, is that often it's because the system has told them that, you know, they write you off and that you've got a mental health issue and you take these drugs. But what we hold on to, and she's a beautiful being actually that does some amazing work behind the scenes, as many professionals do that we don't get to hear about, is sometimes we just help bring a shard of light to what can look like a totally negative existence, one that they have suffered in for a long time. And then a switch in belief, or taking something seriously, but taking them on that next step, as you say, of that journey. And that's the high end. But often there's a lot of people who are struggling with mild to moderate, but they manage their functioning, they're managing their lives on a day-to-day basis. But I think that is probably another conversation to have, Diane, and it's been absolutely lovely hearing your journey in full today and all the different experiences you have and what you continue to bring to everybody, for the professionals that you work with, the people that come into contact with those professionals, the connections that you make. That's clearly what your purpose and path has been about. So I feel really privileged to hear your story. So thank you for agreeing to come on and chat with me.
You are more than what. It's been a pleasure. But I hope people can get from the beginning to the end of this. We must have been here. We have been here over a couple of hours, haven't we? But there's everybody's got stories, haven't they? And stories do make a difference. So hopefully, I really appreciate you inviting me to this and giving the space for this today. And that's one thing I will be doing at my festival, is telling my personal story. But I've only got 40 minutes. So that's going to be a challenge putting the nuggets in there, isn't it? For the first time, I'll be telling my story at the
Oh,
festival.
wow.
Yeah. So, but what you've done today is you've evoked, you took me somewhere 20 years before I thought where we were going to start today. So, but again, that's what I do. I start where we're meant to start in that moment.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
thank you very much, and hopefully, people will find what they need within this, you know. And
Yeah.
I know I'll see you before, but how brilliant is it that we're going to be able to share the festival together, and you can bring that massive plethora of all those decades of experience that you've got from the medical side of life, and you're bringing it, so you're bringing the two. You've got the model for the two, and that's exactly what I think I've touched on a couple of times in this. We need that. It's phenomenal, but hey, there's this, and it's about having the two and the awareness and the education, and you're bringing that, aren't you? So yeah,
that integration of the two. And just on that final note, is that one of the things that you train as a therapist is to work for 50 minutes, and that's been embedded into the psyche of everybody that's ever done the training. But I remember when I was studying NLP, and they based a lot of NLP on the work of Virginia Satir, who was a family therapist. And I sort of developed her style when I was working with families, because we used to get referred families, is that you go in and you work through the cycle of the chaos, the grits, the difficulties. And I think she used to spend on average about 2.5 hours. So 2 to 2.5 hours is usually the magic segment of time to go from the beginning, middle to the end of a journey, and then arrive at a place of either creating a new set of ideas or resolution or inspiration. So I didn't want to put a time limit on this, because that's what people do. I wanted to create it as a journey for what felt right. And that's always about what you're about, and it's about what I'm about. And I can always break it down into segments, make it an audio book.
Yeah.
And we can do part 1A and go into that in more depth at another time. But no, it's been absolutely brilliant. So thank you, Diane.
Thank you very much appreciated.